On this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast, I'm joined by native speaker of Esperanto, Gavan Fantom, to talk about the language and also how he was brought up speaking it as a first language.
Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast, the podcast that gives you the tools and inspiration to learn languages faster and more efficiently. And now your host, Chris Broholm.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. This is episode 16, and I'm your host, Chris Broholm. And I want to immediately thank everyone for taking part at the Polyglot Berlin Gathering, or the Polyglot Gathering Berlin, however you want to say it. I just came back last night, and it was a great pleasure to see so many people in real life, so many amazing language learners, and also people I've talked to on the Facebook and on the YouTube and everywhere. Some of you might be listening to this right now. If you are, and if you were in Berlin, I want to personally thank you for coming out and also saying hi if we talked or anything. It was really a great event for me, and it was really quite amazing to have people come up to me and say, oh yeah, I listen to your podcast, I read your blog. You know, it really is a nice feeling to get that. So if you're out there, you're listening, don't hesitate to send me a comment or leave a review on iTunes or anything that you feel like doing. It really does help, and I appreciate every single one of them. At the conference, I was fortunate enough to persuade, I don't know if I was fortunate enough, but I was fortunate enough that many people accepted my invitation to come and sit down with me for a half to a whole hour and talk about language learning and languages in general. So over the next coming weeks, you're going to hear some of these interviews from Berlin. They're going to be with people that you've definitely heard about. I'm not going to spoil any of the surprises, but it starts today with Mr. Gavan Fantom. And what's interesting about Gavan is that he's a native speaker of Esperanto, meaning that he was brought up with Esperanto as his first language, and therefore he is probably the best chosen to talk about Esperanto. And the reason I'm talking about Esperanto is because during my stay in Polyglot Gathering Berlin, my kind of impression of Esperanto has greatly changed, because and I talk about this with Gavin in the interviewed segment, but basically the whole idea is that if you're looking at it from the outside and you don't know anything about it, it quickly looks like, you know, a bit of a secret club and people hanging out around their own language. But after having met a lot of these great people and talked to learners of Esperanto as well, somebody like Benny Lewis's girlfriend Lauren, having talked to her about her Esperanto project and seeing how far she's come in 6 weeks, and kind of hearing her feelings on how the community embraced her, really kind of leads me to believe that the preconceptions I had about Esperanto were mostly erroneous. So what I've decided is that I'll get into Esperanto. I don't know when or how, but I would go on to fluent3months.com and check out Lauren's videos on the matter, because she's doing it or has done it, and I'm sure that if it works for her, it could work for me too. So I'm excited about that, and I'm excited to bring you an Esperanto episode. And if you're an Esperantist out there listening, whatever that word kind of implies, we do talk about it in the video as well, in the audio. But basically, an Esperantist, I'm assuming, is somebody who speaks Esperanto, but still some people decide not to go by that title. So, but anyway, if you are an Esperanto speaker out there listening to this, I want to say, well, first of all, thank you for listening, and second of all, I want to apologize if I make any grave mistakes in the interview segment based on ignorance, because it's very easy to have, as I mentioned, preconceptions about language or indeed a community, and so some of the questions I'm asking Gavin might seem a little critical of the whole movement. But don't worry about it. It's only, in order to kind of provoke a good response from Gavin, and he was a good sport about everything. So I don't think I overstepped any boundaries, but at times I did bring out some kind of common, well-known criticism. The last part I want to just briefly touch on is that the interviews were recorded in the hotel room. And of course, the hotel rooms in a little German cheap hostel are of course not soundproof, and I was unable to find any really good places to record. So if you feel like there's a bit of a roominess to it or a bit of a noise that isn't usually present in the podcast recordings, then I do apologize for that. But that is the kind of the sacrifice we have to make of our ears when we are doing sort of live recordings. These were recorded live in Berlin in the last week or so. And so, the audio quality is as good as I can make it with my measly editing skills, and I did attempt to make it as good as possible. So I hope you'll enjoy the interview today with Gavan Fantom and the coming weeks with other great polyglots. If you have any questions or comments, as per usual, feel free to leave a comment anywhere. I'm sure I'll see it. YouTube, the blog, Twitter, Facebook, wherever you like. Even using the contact page on the actualfluency.com website, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you for listening, and thank you for being amazing at the Polyglot Gathering in Berlin. If you were there, I can't wait for the next one. So here is the interview with Gavan Fantom about Esperanto. I'm joined today with Gavan Fantom. Is that how you say it?
Gavan Fantom.
Fantom. Okay, yeah. So you maybe anglicized it a little bit. Yeah, it's still a cool name. And I've brought Gavan here to talk about Esperanto. And I know that a lot of people might not have heard of it, or maybe you've heard of it but don't really know what it means. So we'll get into that. But first, I just want to ask you how you're feeling about the conference so far. Are you enjoying it? Hanging out? And
I'm absolutely loving it so far. I've almost had enough sleep, but it's getting difficult with so many interesting things to go to.
Right.
I've had an absolutely amazing and somewhat overwhelming experience just with all the different languages going on at the same time. It's tiring, but it's really good.
Yeah, and of course you're sleeping in a new bed and stuff. I definitely had trouble sleeping, so when you have to, it's like mentally draining, isn't it? It's not physical. You're not physically tired, but it's like, oh, my head is tired. Don't you feel that way?
Oh, it's a long enough day. I just zonk out.
It's just completely gone. That's great. And of course we're talking about Esperanto today. Did you have any other languages that you went around and talked a little bit in, or was it mostly that you were focusing on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I arrived, I was just putting my stuff down on my bed, and somebody came in and talked to me in German, and
there you go.
And when we reached the limits of my German, we switched to Esperanto, and when we reached the limits of his Esperanto, we switched to Serbian. And when we reached the limits of that, we eventually discovered that we both more or less natively speak English. So that was pretty cool.
That is the real one of the eye openers for me, is that you can have two people from the same country who speak perfect English, as this example, but you speak other languages almost like you didn't even care about English. It's like I found that experience great.
Yeah,
and I do it all the time with some of my friends. Chris, who also lives in the studio. We talk, of course, we have English, both of us, but when we speak another language, it's almost like there's something going on. I can't really explain it, but it's pretty cool. And some of you see at these events, I guess.
That's nice when you have a choice, isn't it?
Yes, fantastic. Yeah, and some people have like 10, 12 fluent languages here, which is insane. I feel like. I mean, I need to get them in the studio and drill their heads about this, because it's just unbelievable. I mean, it takes time, of course. Time is probably the most important factor, but just to be able to juggle between 10 different languages, just like casually turning around, and then you switch to Portuguese and you go to whatever,
Well, I was in a talk before lunch. It's absolutely inspirational. I mean, the guy was there just talking. He was telling the story of his travels and languages that he was learning, and every 3 or 4 sentences, often halfway through a sentence, he just switched to another language.
Wow.
And I just completely lost count of which languages he was speaking.
Yeah, he's really incredible. I haven't actually talked that much to him, but I want to do it. I want to get him in the studio. I want to get everyone in the studio.
Yeah.
But Gavan, of course, you are known by the people around here, and that was also your talk. It was Esperanto. Yeah. And if we were talking about what to talk about today, and we had probably had to start with, what is it anyway? What's the kind of the cliff notes on the story behind, and how did it become kind of this big thing? I mean, it is a big thing around here, definitely here in this community, but also around the world. It's growing and growing. So what is it, Esperanto?
So Esperanto is in different categorizations: a conlang, constructed language, an international language, an artificial language, an auxiliary language, whatever you want to call it. It's been around for a while, actually.
Yeah.
It was originally published back in 1887.
Right.
So it's had a while to, mature a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a very long time on the timescale of language evolution.
Sure.
But it's long enough to have several generations of people speaking it, to have moved with the times, acquired new words, and really to grow a community.
Right. So what was the original kind of philosophy behind? Because obviously we have, I think the latest estimate is about 6,000 languages to choose from. So why did this person decide, that's not quite good enough, we need something new? What was the reasoning? Do you know any of this?
So, Zamenhof, who created the language, he was living in an area which, let's say, was not particularly stable.
Right.
There were a number of different populations who had different languages, who had frictions, quite significant frictions.
Right.
And his idealism was that maybe his contribution to solving this and to, in a grand sort of sense, achieving world peace, was that if each of these people, if they could speak a common language,
right,
if they could talk to each other, if they could communicate, they might start, buying eeach other beers or something rather than killing each other.
Right. So that was the philosophy, to bring people together.
It was, yeah. And there's, a lot of the construction of the language is designed with this idea in mind that it should be a second language. It should be something that people can acquire later in life.
Right.
So, I mean, from the very beginning, his goal was to make it something that was possible to learn as a second language.
Right.
Because he didn't want, you could have taken one of the languages of the groups and made everybody else learn it, but then, that gives somebody a privilege over the others, and, it's, he didn't really want that. So.
I see. But of course, I'm talking to you about Esperanto because you have the quite unique experience of having been brought up with it as a native language.
Yes.
And we'll get back to that in a second, but you say that it was made to be a second language or an acquired language. In what sense was that reflected in the language? Do you have any examples, or is it because it's just so simple, or so it shouldn't be too hard?
It's basically that.
Right.
I mean, if you're actually genuinely wanting people to learn your language, you're going to make it something that people have a hope of learning, right?
Yeah.
Contrasting with that, you still need to make it expressive. You still need to make it general. And so this was the balance that Zamenhof tried to achieve with Esperanto, was to try and make it, a full language and fully expressive.
Great.
But without some of the more complex issues that some of the languages, some of the, let's say, natural languages have evolved.
Something like cases or complex tense creations and stuff like that.
Well, there is some use of cases, and you can make complex tenses, but it's done in a way, certainly the tenses are done in a way that's, follows some kind of logic.
Okay.
And are pretty regular. You've also got things like conjugation of verbs.
Okay.
That's something that certain classes of language make really quite difficult. There's a lot of things to actually learn there. So the conjugation in Esperanto is pretty straightforward.
But there is conjugation.
There is, in the sense that you conjugate the verb to indicate the tense.
Right.
So, but not the speaker.
Right. So it's like Danish, actually. That's what we do as well.
Okay.
Present tense for every speaker is the same. And then if we need past or future, we'll change it. But so that's nice. That makes it easier, because some of the hard things about, say, Russian, or I guess even German, is that it just changes all the time. Yes. So, and when you, in particular in German, because all the verbs come at the end, by the time you reach the end, you're like, what was the subject again? And you just put something random in like third person or whatever. Yeah, it's probably third person.
Yeah, each language has its idiosyncrasies, and the word order in German, the cases in some languages.
But Esperanto, thankfully, was simplified, and they took what was useful from kind of the cases and the verbs of other languages, but they made it into a kind of a more simplified and still practically useful way.
Yeah, I mean, some people will claim that Esperanto is somehow perfect. It isn't.
Wow, yeah.
Right? It can't be. It was the work of one person who, he had idealistic goals. He made a significant effort to make it easy.
Right.
But if you look at it from a sort of linguistic theory point of view, you will always be able to find things that, could be done differently or might lead to it being even simpler.
Right.
But in practice, it was simple enough that people with that idealism could pick it up and run with it.
Right.
And a lot of people have managed to learn Esperanto to a conversational level who, at least in their own opinion, would not be able to learn some other natural language.
That was the whole idea.
Yeah.
And that's still the idea today, I guess. But I guess we'll get back to how the Esperanto community is now. But let's get back to your family history, because we talked briefly about this yesterday in the Culinary Festival. But can you give us how far back does it go? Because you were brought up as a native Esperanto speaker.
Yes.
And then you told me, but your mom was as well. So I was like, I was excited to hear just how far back it goes. I don't know how much. Obviously, when you go further and further back, there's less and less information. But how much how far does it go back, basically, in your family?
I think you've pretty much covered it there.
Oh,
actually.
Sorry. But
that's right. My mum was born in Rotterdam. And her mother was English and her father was Dutch, and they lived in Rotterdam at least for the first few years of her life, until after the Second World War.
Right.
And then they moved to England. Now my father was not brought up speaking Esperanto. He started learning it when he was 16.
Right.
And that's pretty much as far back as it goes.
Right. But if your mother was brought up native Esperanto, the influence must have come from her parents. But you don't know which one of them kind of started it, or if it was both, or back that far.
Oh, I don't remember that.
But it is interesting, and like we also talked about, when you think about the time, you said 1887.
Yes.
Yeah. And if it was your grandparents, they are pretty early adopters of the language. I know they're not probably first generation, whatever you want to call it, but to have adopted it somewhere between the 20s and 30s, probably that's pretty early in the life cycle, isn't it?
Sure. Although it was around that time that there was a big sort of wave of popularity of Esperanto.
Right. So you think that's connected to when your family started learning it?
I don't know if it's connected or not, but it's certainly coincidental. I think it.
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact dates, but it was sort of around that time.
Right. So I guess the big question that everyone asks you, and the big question is how was it? When you're growing up? And I know it's hard to compare, because obviously you would have had to be grown up as an English native speaker to compare it to how it was as an Esperantist. But I'm sure you have some thoughts on this. So how was it to be brought up? And did the kids around you in the neighborhoods make fun of you for speaking this weird language, or?
Well, of course they did.
Yeah.
Kids will make fun of you for anything that's a little bit unusual.
It's true. It's true. So how were you in? Was it just your family, or were you living in kind of a place where it was common, or was just?
No, it was pretty much just my family in the local area. But we did, we did make connections with other families who were doing similar things. So we'd travel around a bit and go and visit some.
Sure.
My parents would go and visit their friends from the Esperanto movement, and if they happen to have kids as well, then we go and play and talk in Esperanto and so on.
Wow. Yeah. Was there any difference in when you hear your parents speak, even in English? I mean, they have a very different way of speaking. Do they call it the register or the domain or the mode or one of these linguistic things? They change depending on who you're speaking to. Is there a difference in Esperanto when it's spoken, like say, by your parents, and then your generation of Esperantists and those speaking now? Have you seen any kind of developments in that area?
Well, that's a very interesting question. It is a living language nowadays. So there are new words that come into existence. Slang sort of things. I mean, there's one word that's particularly coming to mind now. And for years, there was really no word that corresponded to the English word cool.
Oh, really?
Like, that's cool.
Right.
And, a few years back, somebody coined one.
Yeah, what was it?
It was Moyosa.
Okay.
And that's actually kind of like an abbreviation. It sort of stands for Moderna Young Stila.
Okay.
Which is like modern young style.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, it's not a direct translation, but it's kind of the essence of the word cool.
It's an interpretation almost.
Yeah.
So you would say that because it's a living language, there's definitely kind of a difference between young people Esperanto and those who were kind of, started learning it maybe 40, 50 years ago.
I wouldn't say it's a huge difference,
right,
but you can see a bit of that evolution going on.
And that's interesting, I think, because when you have a constructed language, and we have Tokipono, as we've talked about that a little bit as well, how that is a fixed vocabulary. Sort of. I mean, that's the theory, but it seems to be...
I'm sure it isn't.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's it says on the cover and in the introduction 120 words, but it is... I mean, it's not totally new, but it's way newer than Esperanto, of course. But that's the contrary. So in Esperanto, it is a language. If there's a need for a word, and you say that's probably what the community felt like, there's no... I can't say, that's great, or that's cool, or something. And the community kind of goes together and come up with one.
Well, all it takes is for one person to start using it, and if other people like it, if other people find it fills a niche, it's going to catch on, isn't it?
Right. So how did it work practically? Were you in terms of school and things? How did that connect? Were you homeschooled or?
No, I went to normal school.
Right. So English was, of course, a big part of what
yes,
that must have been. And so how did you? I mean, when you're a child, I know children are very good at being multilingual, but how did you feel about it? Do you have any memories from your childhood of like the balance between English and Esperanto? Like, how did it feel for you as a person? Did you have any memories of that?
Well, I remember my first, let's say first few weeks at school.
Yeah.
Actually, because at that time I wasn't all that confident in English.
Right.
So when I started school, yes, I was able to speak English, but I didn't really feel that I could express myself that easily.
Right.
So I felt like I was stumbling. Now, being of such a young age, obviously it didn't take too long to pick it up.
Right.
But yeah, I was definitely a lot stronger in Esperanto at that time than I felt in English.
Yeah. So did that of course, you said kids always make fun of each other and stuff, so it must have been stressful at times as well to have that kind of... come in as kind of the odd one out, so to speak, I'm sure. Oh,
sure. I mean, there are obviously many other things that the kids could choose to pick on.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that. But it did, I think it did make it a little bit difficult, when I was upset about something and just wanted to express myself that way.
Right. But nobody at your school understood it, or?
No.
Right. Yeah, see, that for me would be very kind of emotionally hard, because you have nobody to kind of speak your innermost emotions. I mean, you could try it in English, but it's just not the same, is it?
Well, I did eventually manage to do that in English,
right.
Clearly, right?
That's good.
Yeah, like I said, kids pick this stuff up quite quickly, and it didn't take too long.
It's a big advantage.
Yeah.
One of the advantages of learning Esperanto, and I guess we should touch on some practicality as well, people tell me that they get a good sense of grammar without being confused by complexity. So you get taught kind of the basics of tenses and cases and all these kind of grammatical phenomena that appear in most languages. So by learning Esperanto, you're kind of doing it as a stepping stone to learning very complex grammatically languages. That's what people tell me. But when you're a native of Esperanto, surely you're not taught kind of the in-depth of the grammar. You're just kind of taught like through speaking, right? So would you say your experience of the Esperanto, what do you call it? Esperanto grammar? Is that the? Is that less of people who learn it today, or did you also have kind of an introduction or a schooling in the grammar behind it, or did you just learn it kind of by speaking?
I think probably a bit of both.
Right.
But then the Esperanto grammar is very regular. and there are easy to see patterns.
Right.
Like every single noun ends in the letter O. You can't miss it.
Oh, really? Okay. See, there you go. That's a top Esperanto tip for people who haven't learned it yet.
Yeah.
If you see a word ending in O,
It's probably a noun,
or a name, I guess, if your name ends in O, or do you change it then?
Sorry?
If your name ends in O, like Fernando,
Yeah.
then that could exist, I guess. Or do you change it like Russian?
Well, so names, I mean, some people take names as they are. Some people try to turn them into Esperanto names.
Oh, really? That's kind of like, give an example of like an Esperanto name. Like, do you know Chris, for instance, or Christopher?
Christopher,
What would they try to do with that?
so I know somebody who calls himself Cristoforo.
Oh, really? That's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. And so you didn't really, I mean, when people learn Esperanto, they seem to focus a lot on the grammar because it's simple. So why not just dive in and really get the full picture? Whereas if you're in a language like Russian, where there's tons of grammar, you can barely kind of scrape the surface, really.
Absolutely.
But because you had it as a kind of a native, natural way, you say that you had some grammar, but it was probably less than those who pick it up as a second language.
I don't know about less. Maybe less formally taught, but
right. You deduced it, maybe.
Well, possibly. I mean, I think I had a mixture of picking it up and my parents explaining it to me and so on. It's also fairly simple to explain. I mean, you have the basic concepts of grammar, and you're going to have to explain that at some point in whichever language, right?
Right.
Whether that's at home or at school.
Yeah.
I do remember when I was trying to learn French at school.
Yeah.
I remember seeing my classmates around me struggling to understand the parts of speech and the really basic concepts of grammar, and the teachers struggling to explain it.
Okay.
And I had an epiphany when I realised that when the teacher says noun, they mean a word that ends in O in Esperanto.
Right. Wow.
When they say adjective, they mean a word that ends in the letter A.
Wow, so you connected the dots.
Yeah. And from that point onwards, it was really easy to understand parts of speech and to relate the grammar.
That is really interesting, actually. I hadn't thought of that, but I guess you can do that for most, well, not most languages because they're not so regular, but in languages that focus a lot on endings, like something like Russian, I keep referring to Russian for some reason, but, where all the endings are very important to the cases, I guess you could make kind of the same realization and then deduce the meaning. If you see that the word is in the location ending in E usually, then I guess you could kind of guess the meaning of it. And is that what you did for French? That you knew it was a noun, and then maybe you knew the word before or something, and you kind of went, thought about it and then deduced it.
Well, sometimes the words are similar, so sometimes you can pick that up as well.
Right.
But in terms of the endings, so Slavic languages tend to have the thing where, because most of them have a lot of genders as well, so there's only so many vowels you can use for word endings, and so you end up having lots of different gender case combinations that have actually the same ending.
Right.
So it's easy to work forwards, but not always easy to work backwards.
Right. So you would end up with like 2 or 3 possibilities. That's the furthest you can narrow it down.
Yeah.
Right. But in Esperanto, it's always regular, and you can always
they're more distinct in Esperanto.
Right.
So the endings don't tend to be reused for other grammatical concepts.
Right. And I think that's a good way to start creating a language, like make unique endings or concepts so you don't confuse them.
Yeah.
Because I guess that's the problem with also German. When people learn German, I know from my own German that whether it's feminine, masculine, or neuter, a word, if I don't know what a word is, of course I'll think about if it ends in E, it's usually this, and if it ends in shen, it's neuter, and these rules we heard in school. Yeah. But other than that, if you don't know that, you can't speak correctly. Because they're the same. They're not. You can't just separate them. But if every word ending in E, everyone was feminine, every word ending in O or whatever was neuter, and you had rules for everything, it'd be less complicated. And that's kind of the Esperanto way, isn't it?
Well, apart from the fact that we don't have grammatical genders in Esperanto.
There you go. So that's another plus. If you don't like German because of the genders, learn Esperanto.
Absolutely.
And learning Esperanto is I mean, we're here at a Polyglot conference. It's not an Esperanto event. And I know you've been to a lot of the Esperanto events. What are the differences in kind of the feeling and the vibe between an Esperanto event and an event like this where it's all the languages? Is there a difference or...?
You know, it's pretty similar.
Yeah.
Largely because I think this event was modelled on the experiences that people had at Esperanto events.
That is true. Due to the...
There's less Esperanto here and more other languages,
right,
which you would expect, or certainly I would expect. But then, you know, last night I had an experience. I was about to walk into the Gufuyo, which is the tea room, and this is one of those things that has come straight from the Esperanto world. Right. And I was having a conversation with somebody in English as I was walking into there, and I saw this sign on the wall, and I thought I was about to walk into this quiet place in the middle of an English conversation, and I actually felt a little bit guilty about that. There was just a moment until I remembered this is not an Esperanto event.
Right.
That's okay.
So you're feeling compelled to switch to Esperanto at that moment when you saw the sign. But sadly, the person you were speaking to didn't understand Esperanto, maybe.
I don't think the person I was speaking to speaks Esperanto, at least not enough to have that conversation.
Right. But of course, there is a community feeling, and I hear that a lot from the people who work. Well, is there a difference between saying I speak Esperanto and I'm an Esperantist?
Maybe. I think it depends who you ask.
Right. Because I've heard people use both.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem to reflect on their ability. It seems like they choose that phrase. Like the people who say Esperantists, I mean, if I had to analyze it based on the language used, I would say that Esperantists are more kind of passionate about the movement and the things behind it. And the people who speak it, well, they just speak it like any other language. You know, it's not that they hate it or anything. They just don't distinguish between Russian and Esperanto.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what it is.
That's basically the distinction that I would draw between those two terms.
Right.
A lot of people don't. A lot of people will call you an Esperantist because you speak Esperanto.
Right.
And I think there's quite a strong feeling, especially I think among the older members of the movement, that that speaking the language and being part of the movement are one and the same thing.
Okay, yeah. Is that something that's changing now then?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, because I definitely feel like you can, from what I've seen people do and things, you can definitely learn a language without really caring too much what's going on behind the scenes, you know?
Sure.
Yeah. And I think that's good, isn't it? To have kind of both in the same.
Oh, absolutely. I do find it a little bit uncomfortable when people assume my politics based on which language I speak.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that is.
Now, the fact that, well, they're not always right, but the fact that sometimes they get it right isn't really the point.
Right. No, it's just the assumption itself. Yeah, I totally agree. So what would you... I mean, I definitely have some opinions about the Esperanto community as a unit, but I guess I'd like you to describe it in like a few words or sentences, how much you need. Like, what would you describe kind of family or the unit that is the community? How would you describe? What's the first thing that comes to your mind?
Well, I think a big thing about it for me is the Esperanto events, because with Esperanto being so widespread geographically,
right?
That means that you're not going to walk down the street in your hometown and find that every person you come across speaks Esperanto. So you need to either get together online or you need to travel in order to meet with people. And so there are these events. There's lots of them, lots of different events, different sizes, different different focus. And there's an atmosphere.
Yeah.
You go there and it's a kind of community feeling. It's
hard to describe, maybe?
Yeah, I guess so. You just sort of go and
it feels...
You're speaking a different language, and lots of people there. I mean, I can't say absolutely everybody's a friend, but you know, lots of friends around and very friendly atmosphere usually. And
They seem very welcoming as well. Like,
yeah.
if you say, "Oh, I just started learning," they would just immediately say, "What can I do to help?" and things. So when you talk to them, it seems like very welcoming community. But at the same time, I must say, I feel like if you don't have any Esperanto or anything, it is a bit of a kind of a bubble or barrier almost. I mean, I could go up to someone and say, I really want to learn Esperanto, and I'm sure he would embrace me like I knew it already. But it's just from an outsider's point of view, there is a bit of this group kind of mentality. Is this something that you would, I guess, agree with the observation to start with, and do you think that how is that being, I guess, counted in the community? How are you trying to make it not this secret club, but going by the philosophy of everyone is welcome and we're unifying everyone? Because I do think it turns some people off that it's like, oh, we're going to the Esperanto events and when we speak Esperanto. And what do you think about this kind of group mentality?
Well, I think it's almost a necessary result of having a group that is actually making an effort to speak the language and use the language. It can be difficult, and I'm sure it does put some people off. But the fact is, if you're there to speak a language, you have to put some amount of effort into learning at least some of that language before you're actually going to have any success with that.
Yeah.
So yes, people who know maybe 2 or 3 words and nothing else are really quite likely to struggle in that environment.
Right.
But we do recognise that people will come along, and actually we do sometimes encourage people to come along if they really have the interest. And where possible, yeah, that's right. And where possible, we try to make sure that there's some sort of beginner's course going on.
That's usually really good,
yeah. Usually either somebody who's good at teaching with a method that doesn't require any other languages, or a language course based on the local language of the event, where the event is held, or something like that, where it's likely that the majority of beginners are going to speak a particular language.
Right.
So, I mean, it
sounds like there's something, like, there sounds like there are positive actions being taken.
Yeah. So
they do recognize that, okay, we will try and open up more. That sounds great, actually. That's a good reassurance, because I want to get into it soon. So it's always nice to, I mean, everyone I talked to at this event who are very much into it, and yourself included, been very, like, every question I've had, even if there's a hint of skepticism or criticism, even in my tone, you've always been very patient with me and kind of said, well, this is how I feel. And, some languages, if you try to criticize them, they almost feel like an insult to their person,
Oh, you get that too.
You get that really? Too. There are just really Esperantists who are, what do you call them, purists?
There are a lot of people who really are sort of more into the ideology than they are experienced in methods of teaching.
Right.
So, it can be really quite uncomfortable sometimes to see this happening, where somebody says, oh, right, you're a beginner, right, let me now sort of coerce you into learning my way and doing this. And,
wow, so it's almost political pressure.
Almost. I mean, I think generally they mean well, but don't really know what they actually end up doing, and I think that has put a lot of people off.
Right.
So I think that's a shame, and at least when I see people doing that, I try to find a way to explain to them why that might not be the best way of dealing with people, but that's not an easy thing to explain to somebody.
As long as that's the kind of the exception, that is unusual for that to happen, then I guess it's still positive, mostly. You can always have those one out of a group of, let's say, 10,000 people. If it's only one who has that kind of tendency, then
I wish it was that rare.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's still work to do, actually. And you also said, one of the first things you said was that Esperanto is not perfect.
Yeah.
And by extension, the Esperanto community can't be perfect either.
Of course. So,
I mean, that's like any language. There will be people who misunderstand, or at least don't know enough about, like, normal general sense, I guess, to actually convey what they think. Because they probably mean well, like you say, they probably just want to really make sure that they understand what they believe is right.
Yeah.
Great. We talked a lot about the community, about what was the language, your personal experience. I guess I'd like to end with a little talk about the practicality of it, because often when we do these shows, it's mostly for people to kind of feel like they leave the show with something that they can, use in their everyday. So I guess I'll ask you, why should anyone learn Esperanto? We already touched about the grammar, but are there any other things that you feel that can boost maybe language learning or personal development, or is there any maybe soul searching, or is there anything that you can think of that would be a positive effect of learning Esperanto?
So I think that the reasons for learning a language are often very personal, and I'm really reluctant to sort of try to give one reason and say this is why you should learn Esperanto, right? Because I think that's unlikely to work for most people. It's also one of those things, I mean, for a lot of languages, the reason people expect to hear is, okay, why should I learn Spanish? Because you want to go to Spain on holiday and then you'll be able to talk to people. But Esperanto doesn't have a country full of people where you can go on holiday, so clearly that's not going to work.
No. There's no country of Esperanto just yet.
No. There are one or two places where people do experiments and try to sort of build a community or something like that, but they're few and far between.
Yeah, and it's also a little bit, the Tower of Babylon is that you're kind of slowly creating that unified human race that is so defiant towards God, or whatever the story was. I had it in Latin of all classes, but they're talking about the language of is it Babel or Babylon? But the language of that city anyway, where they said that if you unite in that way, God will strike down on you or something. And I think that's very biblical, of course, very religious. But isn't there kind of a problem fundamentally with wanting to unify everyone? Like, I mean, that can't be the vision still, can it, from Esperanto?
I don't think the vision was to make everybody the same. I think the vision was to give people a means of communicating with each other and understanding each other.
Right.
I think that's a subtle distinction, but an important one to me.
Right. But going from that to making like concentrations of Esperanto speakers, thus creating small Esperanto outposts, so to speak. Yeah, isn't that kind of going a little bit in that direction, though?
I guess it is in a way, but I don't think anybody's seriously going to try to make the entire world use it as a first language.
That would be outlandish.
I mean, the original ideal was that it would be a second language for everybody.
Right.
Explicitly preserving national languages, national identities, and everything else. As for why to learn it, I mean, that's one reason that you will hear is because world peace.
World peace. It's good. Why do people learn it? I guess it's a way to turn the question around. People you talk to at Esperanto events, what have they told you about why they learn it?
So there are a number of reasons why people do learn it. I mean, one reason that I find to be quite compelling is that as somebody from an English-speaking country, I can go to another country and chances are I'll be able to find somebody on the street who speaks English.
Right.
In a lot of countries.
Of course.
Not everywhere, but a lot of countries. And if I do the same thing, if I look up somebody in that country who speaks Esperanto, there's a good chance that I will get a different reception from that person.
Right. They feel like you're part of the family almost.
A lot more. And less of some foreign tourist who is coming with the language of imperialism or whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
So it's definitely you get to see a different side of the cultures that you visit.
Right. Like couch surfing for Esperantists is something I've heard of as well.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the only thing. That's been around for a lot longer than
the real couch surfing. Well, the universal one anyway. So
the one of that name.
Right. The good. So it's a good tool to, when you travel, if you want to travel, to connect with similarly minded people in other cultures, where if you just came as an Englishman speaking English, they would just automatically be distant from you. They'll be distant as a kind of, oh, you're a foreigner. I mean, we don't hate you or anything, but there's not that closeness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the reception you get as an English-speaking person differs in different parts of the world, of course.
Yeah.
As you would expect, but yeah, it allows you to have a different perspective.
And there's, of course, the Esperanto events. How often will there be? Will it be a few a year, or is it one big one a year?
Oh, there's loads of them.
Right.
Different sizes, different shapes.
Oh, okay. So you could go to 12 to 20 a year if you wanted to, if you had the funds.
Now, if you had the time and the money, mostly the time really, then
Right.
you could probably do that. But unfortunately, that's not really compatible with having an office job.
And of course, if you're into language, which you probably are if you're listening to this, then the people you meet at Esperanto events, most of them will probably also be interested in some form of other foreign language learning, I would imagine.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of that. I mean, this is one of the similarities between Esperanto events and this polyglot event,
Right.
is that, okay, there are more people here who speak piles of languages, but you get quite a big crossover, and there are lots of
Right.
people at Esperanto events who, you will hear lots of different languages,
Yeah.
as well as Esperanto.
I find that really exciting to like walk down the hall and just listen to all the languages that's being spoken.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy about this event. I mean, I think they did a fantastic job organizing. I mean, first time, and Berlin, I think, is a great place because for me as a Dane, Copenhagen, Berlin, it's like it's a 40-minute flight. But not only that, it's a very popular one, so it's a discount airline. EasyJet, they'll fly there. If I have to go to, let's say they were talking about doing one in Toronto, that will cost me probably 10 times as much, which is ridiculous, and I would not be able to go. But Berlin is like Central Europe. People can come from all over, and they have. I mean, I've seen people from Australia and Brazil. I mean, it's insane, and I really applaud those hosts. Gavin, I think we're at about the end of this recording, but do you have any kind of closing thoughts or things you feel like we didn't quite cover, or any closing statement or remarks? You want the mic is yours.
Well, thank you for having me on your show, really. And it's great to be here in Berlin and to be around a couple of hundred people who are seriously into languages and just have such a great experience here. And it was great to talk to people. I did a talk yesterday about this topic about being racist and native.
Why don't you just take a minute to tell about your talk? I mean, you said to me that the talk itself was what we've kind of talked about already, the history and your history, but the questions you got, you're a bit disappointed with?
No, not at all.
Or was it the other way around?
No, it was great.
What do people want to know about the Esperanto or your story?
Well, I mean, there's quite a lot that people want to know. I mean, people's first reaction is, wow, native Esperanto speaker,
Right.
Does that really exist? Is that possible?
Yeah.
How many are there?
Do you know how many there are?
Last time I looked on Wikipedia, it says somewhere between 200 and 1,000 in the world.
Wow, so you're quite unique, actually. Well, that's great. I wish I could have made it, but that's the problem with conferences. They put 2 to 3 talks at the same time. And I knew we'd talked before, and I knew I was going to have the pleasure of asking you everything I wanted in person. So sadly I could not make it, but I'm glad to hear that it went well and people were happy to hear more about this incredible story and movement, I guess. And I hope that, certainly for me, this event has broadened my view of Esperanto, and it really has given me before I was kind of skeptical. I was like, why do I need this? But now that I've met people and they've told me their stories and your stories, and you told me the benefits and advantages, I definitely want to learn it. Also because it's so easy. I'm lazy, and I am also very practical. If I can learn a language, which it is obviously, in a short time, I think people tell me in like 6 weeks or something, you do very well in 6 weeks, particularly with knowledge of German and English and I guess Danish as well.
That's right. If you have experience of language learning, then 6 weeks of concentrated effort is likely to get you to a point where you can be conversational.
Right. Just come and meet people and listen in and slowly develop that fluency.
Yeah.
Great. And I think that also gives people a little bit of hope who are listening out there, because they're like, oh, I can't learn another language. It's too hard. But the fact that you say, 6 months, and of course we have to reiterate, it is a language. It's not, a word game with like 20 words and then you suddenly speak. It is an actual language, and you won't be about this, that you said that you have to learn it like you learn any other language. It's not a walk in the park to learn.
Sure. It's easier than many languages. Right. By quite a long way, but you still have to put in the effort. It's still a language. It still has words that you have to learn. It still has grammar that you have to get used to.
Right. Yeah, and if you're not used to some of the things we talk about, like the endings and the cases, if you come from a language that isn't so heavy on that, that's of course something you need to get your head around. I mean, not even understanding the concept, but that will help you in turn understand the next language, if it's a language that has those concepts. So. Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, and I think we should go back and listen to some talks about what's on now anyway. I don't know.
Oh, we'll find out in a minute.
Yeah, we'll find out. But thank you so much, Gavan. And,
thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you and some of your listeners on at the next Esperanto event.
There you go. Yeah, that's a good advertisement.
Thank you for listening to the Actual Fluency Podcast. For more information, be sure to check out actualfluency.com. Until next time, enjoy learning and have a great day.